Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another episode of our Let's Talk Arsenal series, a show in which we have a chat about our beloved club, talking about different types of topics depending on what's going on in the world of Arsenal. And this season it's been pretty darn positive. But this, of course, is a bit of a special Let's Talk Arsenal show. It's our twice annually, or we try to do this twice annually, typically after the transfer window is closed, where I'm joined by three very familiar faces to have a discussion about everything that's happened in the past 6 months or so. First of all, joining us from Arseblog, it's Andrew. How you doing, Andrew? You good? You well?
Hello, Tom. How are you? Nice to be here.
Yeah, very good, mate. Very good. How has the first 6 months of the season treated you?
Pretty good, has to be said. Enjoyed it quite a lot, and it makes you full of anticipation and hope for the second half of the season. So fingers crossed we can just keep doing what we've been doing.
Absolutely. Fingers crossed indeed. Also joining us from the Highbury squad and former Arsenal striker, Kevin Campbell. How you doing, mate? You good, you well?
I'm good, thanks, Tom. Hi, Andrew. How are you doing?
Hey, Kev. Good to see you.
I feel bad for Clive now because you're not going to say if he's all right because we've not introduced him yet. But we can do that now. Let's bring in former footballing coach and turned professional footballing coach, but of course part of the Arsenal Vision podcast. It's Clive. How you doing, Clive?
Professional. I'm not professional at anything.
I felt bad introducing the former Arsenal striker before you.
Hi, Clive. How are you doing?
I spent my hard-earned money watching that bloke around Europe.
Yeah. That's why I always say, Tom, hi, Clive. How you doing? Because you know what? Respect.
Mate, you gave me one of the best days of my life in Copenhagen, mate. And I never actually thanked you. So there you go. Fantastic.
Special day.
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't alive. No, I probably was. Just to make you feel how you feel. But everyone in the chat box, of course, thank you for joining us. No worries, mate. Everyone in the chat box, hope you're doing good. I hope you're doing well. Do drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, of course, as well. We're going to kick things off with kind of it being the end of the transfer window just only days ago. It's probably the most timely thing to talk about. Andrew, I'll start with you. I remember when we spoke a year ago, us four, and we didn't do anything in that window. And I listened back to that podcast to kind of refamiliarize myself with the points that we made back then. And it was very much along the lines of, if you can't do the right business, don't do any business, was kind of the theme that we spoke about. And obviously, by the end of that season, we reflected on the injuries that we faced that were very unlucky and thought, well, maybe if we'd have done something, it could have actually helped us to get across the line in terms of the top four. But this time around, 3 signings through the door, 2 that have broken a bit away from the typical strategy that we've gone for, but probably reflective of the context of this season. So what did you make of the January window?
I mean, we had to do something for sure. The initial plan seemed to be very exciting with João Felix and Mykhailo Mudryk being lined up. But then, of course, Chelsea came along and did what Chelsea did and just bought players that other clubs want to buy, which meant we had to do different things. And I think the business that we've done, as you said, it's reflective of the context of the season, but it's also reflective of the context and the build-up of this particular squad. I think signing a 28-year-old, a 31-year-old, and a relatively raw central defender is something we can do now because we've got such a good platform, a good foundation. When we didn't get Mudryk, we had to get somebody else in the wide positions. We got Trossard. He was available. There was a measure of, I think, availability there, given what was happening with him at Brighton, but sensible deal. Pressed at the end for a central midfielder. The pursuit of Caicedo didn't go the way we wanted. I think we were probably right not to push that any further. The money that we offered Brighton, I think, was more than fair for a guy who's played less than 30 Premier League games, even if he is a good player. So we've had to do something a little bit different. It might take us a little while to get used to the Jorginho thing. And then Kivior gives us a left-footed central defender, somebody that we've needed, somebody Mikel Arteta has wanted in the squad. So I think when you step back, it's probably not as exciting as it might have been, but it's not like last January where I think we almost had the option not to do anything, whereas this time around we couldn't repeat that. We couldn't do that again because there's so much to play for. So while it might not have been ideal, we'll wait and see how these guys play out over the course of the remainder of the season. But I think we've learned a bit from last January as well, that even if it wasn't exactly the right player, we've been able to bring in players who look like they should fit and be able to do a job. You're on mute, Tom.
Oh, the professional, as always. Yeah, classic. As I was saying before, I was really interrupted by my own computer. Yeah, look, the context, I think, is the most important thing around this. And certainly the age profiles may be a deviation of what we've done before. It certainly fits into what we're aiming to try and to achieve this season. And getting something done, as you said at the start of your answer, Andrew, I think it absolutely was the most important thing that we got done, was getting numbers through the door, but also that provided quality, which I think we can agree the players that we got do that. Casey, in terms of kind of where your head was at the start of the window and what your expectations were and what maybe your desires were for what Arsenal would do, how did you feel at the end of the window? Did you feel fulfilled by what we'd done or a little bit shortchanged? I think we might have lost Casey. We'll try and I think he's on a little bit of a delay. Yep. Clive, do you want to come in and answer that whilst we try and get him back?
Sorry, do you want to go again, Tom, that question?
Yeah,
Sorry.
just in terms of the window, in terms of where we were at the start of it and how you felt in terms of your desires, your expectations of what we would do. And when we got to the end of the window, did you feel fulfilled in what we did, or did you feel slightly shortchanged with what we did?
Yeah, I'm learning to grow up about this and be worried about what I think are the right things. I'll tell you, my biggest worry for January, right, was getting a WhatsApp from Andrew saying, we've got to do a podcast just after the transfer window, and we've done nothing. We are top of the league, and we haven't bought anybody at all. Can we come on and try to explain that to the Arsenal world? Honestly, I have skills, but that one I would not be able to do, because this time we had to do something. And that was my key driver. We could all see and feel what's happening. To do nothing would be criminal. Last year, where we were in the project life cycle, we had some contracts to annul, people to rid ourselves of, and we took a decision to make the squad smaller, focus on unity, harmony, all those things, until our legs fell off towards the end of the season. But we accepted it. And maybe we would not have had that form with a bigger squad. So we accepted it. We rode the wave until literally we ran out of steam. Whereas this year now, we're thinking, okay, everyone stayed on board over the summer. We watched pre-season, tip-top, go into the season, and we start. And we look fantastic. And we realize that we get to the break and we have to do something. We just have to. Of course, we got dangled the nice bunch of chocolates, all the nice pretty signings, which I YouTube to death. But when it comes down to it, we ended up with 3 players that make us stronger. And that's it. We don't know by how much yet, because it's to be proven. But there were lots of pictures of our bench being sent out on Twitter. And that tells people that, and it looks a bit better. You know, I sent out a tweet towards the end of last year talking about our bench at Newcastle. And it had people like Zach Swanson on the bench. Nothing against Zach Swanson, but there was other youth players in that dressing room at Newcastle. And that's not where we need to be if you want to sustain a title challenge. So for me, it was just fixing that issue. And we can discuss the qualities of an individual player. And that's what we do. We debate players' quality, don't we? So, which is fine. But that's to be proven as we go forward.
Yeah, no, I think Swanson's a really good example because he left for League One Portsmouth, you know, in the summer. So I think that kind of gives a context around what kind of level of player, with the utmost respect, and kind of what we would have been bringing off the bench. So to see the change that we brought through, and also the return from injury of the likes of Smith Rowe as well, is going to give us hopefully that added kick that we've needed in this second half of the season. KC, let's do a quick live test. Can you hear us? Can you see us?
I can hear you.
Lovely stuff, because we can see and hear you too. Talk to me. Obviously, I asked you the question. I think you heard what it was, but tell me your thoughts around the window.
My thoughts around the window. Clive makes a good point about our bench. I made a comment on the Highbury squad, and maybe to you guys, that our bench should be on Farley's Rusks. They were that young. They were babies. Now, It's all right when you're trying to build something together. Everyone, great. Not much expected. We want top 4. But the position we find ourselves this January, obviously, is huge. It's an opportunity that we couldn't turn our noses at. What we couldn't do is, I know some of the shiny signings look nice, but they got a lot of them were no experience, really, no Premier League experience. João Felix, look, started off pretty well in the first half at Chelsea and got sent off in the second. That could have happened to us. Mudryk, he's played a handful of games, really. Very talented, very quick, but no experience. So what we done, we went out and we strengthened our bench. We strengthened our squad with experience. I like Trossard. I do. Helped in the win against Manchester United just by coming on. Looked a lot different. I think we're gonna start seeing these players having to incorporate and bed themselves in. It's going to be better at the Emirates because we dominate the ball so much more. But Jorginho one, I think there was a little meltdown with our fan base, wasn't there? Just go and pay the money for Caicedo. Just go and pay the money for Caicedo. Brighton don't need the money. They were never going to sell him. And, Andrew makes a really good point. We offered just about the right money. And, they said no. So we pivoted and we went and got a different player, so to speak. Someone with not the energy, but someone with the experience who could sit at the base of that midfield and dictate our play. Because realistically, that's what the problem is when Thomas Partey's not there, isn't it? That is the problem. So we went and rectified that. We got Kivior, who can play centre half. He can play in midfield if need be. But again, we need to incorporate him. But when you look at our bench now, Smith Rowe's struggling a little bit, still with injury. You look at our bench now and we look a little bit stronger there. So I think we've done okay.
Yeah, I do too. I think the key thing and a point I think has been across all 3 answers is if you look at the squad before the window and you look at it after, there's an improvement. And when you're fighting for what we're fighting for, that is the bottom line, what we need to achieve. And so we've done that. I also think, when you compare the Jorginho contract to some of the previous Chelsea signings we've made in the 18 months within a year, it's smarter, it's savvier, it makes more sense. Just to stick briefly on it, Andrew, I kind of want to ask around the criticism. Casey brought up the hysteria that we saw online, the minor meltdown that us Arsenal fans love to have on social media. One of the key kind of points that was brought forward is more toward Edu and around the idea of Arsenal's priority targets not being got. We've seen, in the past few transfer windows, the likes of Dusan Vlahovic, Lisandro Martinez, Rafinha. We're now seeing Mudryk and more recently Moises Caicedo and Arsenal not necessarily being able to get those and having to pivot. And we have to say pivot quite well because we built a squad that's now fighting for a title this season. I asked Arteta in the press conference ahead of the game against Everton what Arsenal have to change to kind of, reach those targets. And he basically, as you would expect, kind of batted it off to you can't always do what you plan to do at the beginning of the window. But is it a concern for you that we're not getting those priority targets too regularly?
I don't really think so, because I think what happened in January was extraordinary, with Mudryk, with what Chelsea are doing. I mean, you're fighting with a club that just, I can't really make a great deal of sense in terms of how they're spending their money and how they're building their squad and what their plan is. So I think in those circumstances, it's not like a fair fight in a way, because they're just willing to do whatever it takes. And maybe you could say Arsenal should be willing to do whatever it takes. But they have got good signings in, and Arsenal aren't the only club that misses out on players. I mean, I think if you read some of the stuff that was doing the rounds about Edu, is like we're the only club in football history that's never signed a player that we want to sign. That's not how it's just nonsense, right? We have signed good players. We're top of the league by 5 points when people are making these comments, and a very significant reason as to why we're top of the league is because we've recruited really, really well. And the issue then you have when you start operating in a higher bracket, I mean, look, I'm not casting any aspersions on any of these players because I love them, but Arsenal should be able to go get Aaron Ramsdale. They should be able to get Ben White. They should be able to get Tomiyasu. They should be able to get guys that they brought in. We brought it up a level with Zinchenko and Gabriel Jesus in the summer, and now we're looking at another level again. And when you get to that other level, when you're top of the table, when you're bringing in players who are trying to raise the level of a team that's top of the table, you're looking at real high quality players. Two things: high quality players cost a lot of money, and other clubs want those high quality players. So yeah, it'll be great if Edu can get a couple of those deals across the line and people can calm down. Great, but let's not make the mistake and think we didn't push hard for some of the signings, like offering 70 million for Caicedo. That's a lot of money for a guy that cost 4 million 2 years ago. Offering 100 million for Mudryk in a different way from Chelsea. This is a kid who, could have been available for 30 or 40 million at most 6 months ago in the summer window. So we didn't get them done, but it's not as if we didn't try. And I think in these kinds of deals, there's always complications. And the biggest complication very often is another club who will just come in and offer more money and more money. And, as we can see, and as football has gone, there are clubs for whom money really isn't an object, or they choose not to think about money as an object. So I don't really worry too much about that at the moment. Let's see what happens in the summer.
It's quite a nice segue, actually. Clubs considering what they think about money and the use of money and whether they talk about their money or could declare their money. Manchester City, Kevin, have obviously been facing now what looks to be around, or exactly, I'm not sure if it's around or exactly 100 charges of potential breaches of financial fair play. The Premier League are the ones that, of course, as we know, have levelled these charges. And although we're not expecting a resolution to this swiftly, it's described as being unprecedented. And I'm curious to get your reaction to it.
Yeah, it is unprecedented. But what we have to look at is it's over the best part of 14 years. So what happened after year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, and onwards? If they knew this was going on, why wouldn't you step in? So for them to finally make that move now, I know it's alleged, but you have to have incriminating evidence if you're gonna make the move now. That's for sure. Listen, it's gonna turn football upside down in my eyes, because Manchester City have been by far the best and most consistent team over the last 5-6 years or whatever. But you're going to get problems with Liverpool. Liverpool run them close a couple of times, and Liverpool are going to say to the authorities, "Well, what's happened with our titles? We could have won those titles." I think Manchester United came second one year. Man United could have won the title
twice. Was it? I think Jose did it and Ollie did it twice. Yeah.
Again, it's gonna cause so many ruptions, and the punishment has to fit the crime, Tom. That's the other thing.
For you, what is that? What is that level of punishment that's reflective?
Listen, we've seen it in other leagues. Teams get demoted. Simple as that. You get thrown out the league. You go down the division or whatever has to happen, because you've got to deter other teams from being able to do it. Now, I'm saying it's alleged because obviously they're not found guilty yet. But if they are guilty, then they have to chuck the book at them. It's that simple.
Yeah, I think we saw news today coming out that they'd appointed the same lawyer that dealt with the situation when UEFA levelled them with that European expulsion for 2 years as well. So whether or not the same outcome happens, well, I say the same outcome, they were still fined, I think, significantly for that situation, but obviously didn't face the ban that they were initially handed. Clive, it's a very delicate situation. Obviously, it's very legal, and we continue to talk about these things in alleged circumstances. The amount of charges is, I think, is what struck the footballing world in particular, and how long, of course, they date back as well. So I'm very curious to get your views on the whole situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost as like it's Emperor's Clothes stuff, right? So the Deloitte football money list comes out. If I just name you 4 teams, Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, Barcelona, and Manchester City, which one would you think shouldn't belong in that group? Which one do you think is number one, even if it is in that group? And it's the one team that we know from going to football matches that can't fill up their end at Wembley, right? So the two they don't sync up, right? They don't sync up. But we're happy to ignore it as a football world because they bring exciting players into the league. And we have exciting games with this level of our league, and we see a fantastic manager playing beautiful football, and we ignore it. What's really happening is, I can say this about Chelsea as well, up to a degree, they've distorted the sport that we love, right? And the reason why Eddie's getting stick for not signing players is that we are now judging Arsenal on these high levels. How can you judge Arsenal on these high levels when Chelsea, for example, had £1.4 billion of extra funding that we didn't have during that period of Abramovich? And as for Man City, we don't know the numbers. We can just guess because, allegedly there are companies paying people from different sources which don't show in the books, etc., etc. Shock horror. This does happen before in sport. You know what I mean? And I find it very hypocritical that the people that make their money, particularly in some of the big shows and big channels that we all subscribe to, don't highlight this early enough because it doesn't suit them to highlight it. Because it creates a business model for them, which allows them to sell what they need to sell, broadband, etc. Because we're all hooked on the overall product. And then when someone makes a mistake, then it's all over the yellow ticker, right? I find it hypocritical. All the big hullabaloo over the Super League, I find it hypocritical that within our own league, we have a similar types of things ongoing within our own structures. We've almost created a Super League in our own country. This is a deep, deep topic, right? And so rather than pinpoint the finger at Man City, I've got less excited about it now because nothing's going to happen. And honestly, mate, nothing's going to happen. 4 years, nothing's going to happen. Don't think they're going to start handing out retrospective medals and retrospective Champions League monies that we missed out on, for example. Nothing's going to happen in the short term. But what I will say is what the Premier League has done is created a cloud over Manchester City. And they have to decide how long they want that cloud hanging over them. And the people that work for them have to decide, do I want to be involved with a club that has this cloud hanging over them? So it might have taken the Premier League 4 years to come up with 100 plus charges, but that's a cloud. That's an environment by which they have to work under. And everybody knows that. So that's going to create a different dynamic to the Manchester City name and model and how it perceives itself around the world with its 11, 12 clubs, Tom, that they have around the world. Everything is up for grabs. Everything is up for grabs. So the way to attack them is not in their money, it's in their name. You attack their name just by creating this cloud. If they want to hang it out for 4 or 5 years, they have to decide, is that how they want to live? It's going to be so interesting to see how this affects their very high quality people they have in the club, including the manager. Say, is this how I want to work? Is how I want my legacy to be defined? It's going to be so interesting to watch what happens next.
It's actually a really good point that I'd not considered, especially with the CFG, the City Football Group. I mean, when I went up to the Man City game the other Friday ago for the FA Cup game, you have to pick up your media accreditation from the training ground rather than the stadium. It's the only stadium I've ever been to where that's the case. And when you go into the media accreditation part of the Etihad Park, they've got the badges of all 12 of the CFG clubs up in there. And it makes you realise, obviously, what a big kind of structure CFG is beyond just Manchester City and how this now affects that as the group, with this obviously being the headline act of CFG. So it's a big point. I'm curious, Andrew, based upon listening to what you've heard there from Clive as well, with your own thoughts on the whole topic. And I know you covered this in this morning's Askcast Extra, which listeners, if you haven't listened to, make sure you go and do that. But what are your thoughts based upon this theoretical cloud that Clive brings up around this and the reputation of the people and players there that are affected by it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's got to be a consideration. I think what's most interesting about this for me is that the Premier League is very conscious of its own brand. And what they're doing with these charges is essentially accusing the most successful club in the Premier League for the last 10 years of cheating, of cooking the books. And in doing so, they have fundamentally damaged the integrity of the Premier League, of the sport, of their own successes. So if City are proven or found guilty of these charges, leaving aside the punishment for 1 second, the Premier League have basically tainted 6 or 8, or I don't know how many titles City have won. Is it 6 or 7 anyway? Something like that. So they're basically saying the champions for 6 Premier League champions 6 times have done it in a way that is in contravention of our rules. Right. So that tells me that the Premier League are serious about this. A 4-year investigation with 115 charges is not just like a little slip. Oh, we made a mistake. Oh, we sent the wrong invoice. We just happened to put 58 million pounds on this invoice rather than 5.8 million. It's just, nobody buys that. So there's a seriousness with which they are approaching this. And I think that's quite an interesting thing to consider because, the Premier League wants to attract investment. It wants to attract new owners, keep that bubble going. How do you get richer owners, bigger owners, all this kind of stuff? I don't quite see where you go after you have countries owning football clubs. Where else can you go? So I think it's very interesting. And in terms of a punishment, if it is proven or if they are found guilty, you cannot level a fine at Manchester City because it's just pointless. It's like a billionaire parking his car on double yellow lines outside a hospital and he gets a parking fine and he just pays the money and he'll still park wherever the hell he wants. It's pointless. You've got to really hurt them. If they've been proved, or if it's proven that their titles, that their successes, that their investment, which has gone into, let's be clear about this, has gone into the managers, it's gone into the players. They've bought brilliant players, they've had brilliant managers, they've made a brilliant team, but if they've done it in a way which is, basically cheating, you really have to hit them hard. And I'm not saying that's what will happen, but if it's proven, they have to be hit hard. And you can look to Italy maybe to see what happens in different leagues, to see how harshly they will punish certain clubs, regardless of the stature of the club. There isn't a bigger club in Italy than Juventus, and look what they did to Juventus. So that's kind of where they're going to go with this.
Twice, Andrew.
Yeah. So, this is how serious this is. And this will be long and City will fight it and everything else. But I cannot believe for a second that the Premier League would go into this in a way that they're not convinced that they have the evidence to prove these charges against Man City.
And I think that explanation is why, and it brings the context to the word unprecedented, because and also what they do here, it sets the tone. If you choke on this one, if you don't deal out the relevant punishment that it's worth, what message does that send out to other potential state-owned funds coming into clubs? Look at Newcastle, just been taken over. If this is going to set a precedent to potentially stop, we hope the same type of thing happening again. Harking back to what Clive you said about 1.4 billion, of course, that we didn't have, that Chelsea had. We've ironically seen Chelsea spend nearly half of that in a year under Todd Bowley. It's incredible money. Last word on this, Kev, just in terms of the fan perspective, because I was listening to a few phone-in shows while I was working today, and City fans calling up, and it's a real difficult one on the social level. If you just take away the people behind these awful decisions and the potential alleged cheating that's been going on, and you look at it from the fan perspective, if you put yourself in the shoes of a Manchester City fan, they've enjoyed great success, they've enjoyed league wins, and it's not them that's done this. It's not them that's been behind the decision makers up top. So how empathetic are you towards kind of those Manchester City supporters in the same way that could see their club go down if that is indeed the punishment they deal out? I highly doubt that will be what it will be, but hypothetically, so that's is. How do you feel for those supporters in that situation? Imagining if that was us.
Yeah, well, one thing I would say is the Man City fans obviously they have no part in it, but they enjoy what they see. They've gone through some hardships, some tough times, and then all of a sudden, there's an injection, there's new owners, great players are coming in, and you're winning titles. It's a dream, and you never want it to end. But as you sleep, the nightmare can come. And this to them is a nightmare, because all of a sudden, everything gets questioned. Let's be honest, everything for the last 14 years is going to get questioned. And in the worst case, it could get taken away. And I'm not saying it is. But if you're a Man City fan, all of a sudden, do you want to go back to being an also-ran? Do you want to go back to going down the leagues? And the fans would always be there, but the ownership.
Well, the fans that go to Man City will be there, you know.
But the ownership, Tom, the ownership have made them much bigger than they ever were in this social media time. Manchester City are now one of the biggest clubs in the world, and there's 114 or 13 or how many reasons why they are now. This is what we're finding out. So if you could flip a switch and we can get to that point, Manchester City fans do not want this part of their history to be eradicated. Of course you don't, because they've had a run and a half at it. But every bad deed will come to the light in the end. And now we're seeing things come to the light, because let's be honest, Clive made a really good point. Clive said, we ignore these things sometimes because Man City are playing great football, and Man City nobody dislikes Man City, and because they've been so successful. Nobody dislikes Man City because they haven't been of that standard in such a long time. Well, they've never been there. Now we could hate them now, we could dislike them now because they're rivals. And then when you hear about what's been going on, it just makes it even worse. As a Man City fan, they're absolutely sick. They're going to absolutely be sick. I know so many Man City fans. I live in Manchester, as you know. It's a sickener for them. It really is. And it's one they're waiting with bated breath, Tom, because this could really disrupt their football club for the next decade.
When you said no, I now understand the concept. I remember for a lot of people, like before the money came in, Man City used to be a lot of people thought they would describe as second teams for people who had those, you know, just a little underdog in Manchester, players that they would enjoy seeing, just Samaras, etc. I remember Samaras being kind of a cult hero there and things like that. So yeah, how things change and how perceptions of clubs change when money comes into it. Let's talk about some fun stuff, Clive, and particularly how good Arsenal have been. Of course, we are doing this off the back of what has been a rarity this season in a defeat. And I was listening to the Vision podcast earlier on where yourself and Paul and Elliot was breaking this down and talking about what Dyche did in particular. Is there hope in you that now we've kind of had that kick up the backside, that this type of game can propel you forwards in the right direction and also give you a hard lesson to learn from in what other teams might do to you as well?
I think we're a victim of timing. We walked into their house at the wrong time. And even if at Everton, I don't think there is a good time. There's something about that ground. We just
horrible
don't see.
I'll tell you that.
We've seen the film, haven't we? We've seen this film so many times, you know. So, yeah, we just don't seem to do well there. But, you know, just going tactically, it's interesting what they did. Very similar to what Newcastle did. And it's something... when people say, I hope we learn some lessons. And I think, yeah, okay, what did we learn about this? What can we learn? How can we overcome these teams? And, you know, the way they boxed us off into the side areas and didn't let us get inside, or when they did let us get inside, they kicked our legs off. We weren't able to get any sort of flow momentum in the interior. We lacked a bit of physicality and presence at centre forward for me for this type of game. You know, we just did. I'm sorry, and we weren't able to read how we needed to connect our front four together. We just our centre forward stayed in the box a little bit too much away from play, didn't get enough touches to pull people around. We didn't run through lines enough. We played to feet all the time. We didn't run through in the half space. We didn't run through on the outside. We didn't cause them enough variety of problems. When we did have the ball to our feet, it was all slow. Some of that was due to the lovely pitch they laid out for us, but some of that was down to ourselves and the fact that we were watching the next tackle where it was coming from. When you're watching where the tackle's coming from, your touch is thinking about protection, retention of the ball, rather than playing through and passing the ball in a flow type way. And so all these things get into your head. And that's what happens generally when you get beaten on a pitch. When a team beats you fair and square, you can point to a number of things that didn't go well. So it was the classic Sean Dyche game. Perfect. 1-0. Oh, please. Can I have a set piece? Cheers. We'll take that. Jog back in. Half hour to go. We were getting tired anyway. Now we get an extra boost of energy in front of a home crowd, which are fervent. I mean, if you wrote it down on a piece of paper, he would have said, that is it. This is perfect. Quick little clap to the fans. Off you go down the tunnel. I'm back. Right? And we were the victims of that. So what can we learn? Well, first thing we need to do is get Gabriel Jesus into an oxygen tank and get his leg right. That's the first thing we need to do, because he's made for this, isn't he? Because when we do go central, bang, round the corner, turns, bang, we're off. We're off and running, and they're running backwards. They're all broken. It's all broken play. Need to get him back. I felt a few of us were a little bit under par and maybe hobbled a bit, some of our key players, and they were disconnected. So I think, if we were at home, how we would solve that, we would just lift the crowd and move the ball very, very quickly on a very, very slick surface. And eventually they would show us the cracks. We weren't able to do that. So I think it's a challenging one for us. We've lost 2 in a row. Let's be honest, we lost 2 in a row. We accepted the first one because we're thinking open top buses in May. So we weren't bothered about the first one, Man City away. But this second one did bother us a little bit, but it won't bother us if we beat Brentford and then beat City at home. It won't bother us at all. And I think it's good to get back home to playing our football again. And maybe as a reminder, post the absolute amazing high of Manchester United at home. It's a reminder that this is not easy. You have to bring it every week. Otherwise, you're going to go through a blip, right? So Saturday is going to be electric. I hope so. And 3 points will follow thereafter.
It's interesting that 6 of the next 9 games in the Premier League are at home as well. It's a real opportunity to build momentum. And the Emirates, obviously, it's been such a breeding ground for success this season that you'd hope that would give us the kickstart we need. Andrew, Clive highlighted a lot of kind of the things, obviously, that we need to work on. Some of them are out of our control, like Jesus' injury, of course, and his return and how important that will be. One thing that kind of bothered me during the game was that all the like-for-like substitutions that were made in the game. And obviously, the system that we started with weren't particularly suiting how we were performing. And kind of the way in which Dyche was playing was countering it really well. And, we had Trossard come from Martinelli, and we had Jorginho come for Partey. We had obviously Tomiyasu come on later on for Ben White. It just felt as though that Arteta didn't want to risk upsetting certain positions, changing the system too much. Does he need to take more risks in these types of scenarios?
I mean, it's difficult to know what more really he could have done in terms of personnel, because we don't have Gabriel Jesus, and Clive made the point, and I'm pretty sure everybody agrees that this is the kind of game where even if he's coming back to fitness, to have him on the bench gives you a different kind of striker. It also allows you to play with 2 strikers if you want, particularly if you're chasing a game. Maybe, he could have brought on Kieran Tierney, somebody who could overlap on that left-hand side. I think that's something that we lacked. When he brought on Tomiyasu, he's not really an overlapping fullback, a different kind of threat, somebody who could get down the side. But again, you're then asking Kieran Tierney to sling in crosses for Eddie Nketiah to go up against Cody and Tarkowski. So it's imperfect, but I do think that there should be a bit more variety when we get Jesus back, when we get Emile Smith-Rowe back, when you get Reece Nelson on the bench. There should be ways of tweaking the team, especially if you're chasing a game, which is not something we've had to do a lot this season as well. That's something we should point out. We haven't really been chasing games. We've been ahead. We've been able to control games, and the substitutions have been about control rather than regain, if you like. So maybe there's an element of him not really being used to that. But I don't think he had a great deal on the bench at Everton that he could have done differently. The Partey substitution on the hour suggested to me that was sort of precautionary, that was pre-planned almost, that the injury he was feeling was, they didn't want to risk him or they didn't want to risk that. But it didn't really work, which isn't a criticism of Jorginho. I think collectively and individually on the day, nobody was really at their best. But maybe when you get to the final 5 minutes of a game like this, we used to remember Arsene Wenger throwing on as many forwards as he could, in whatever way he could. And very often that brought about a goal. 1 point is better than no points. If you go hell for leather for the last 5 or 10 minutes, maybe that's something we could look at. But based on who he had on the bench, I'm not sure he could have done a huge amount differently at Goodison Park.
Indeed, yeah. I think there are opportunities, but he's so, I think, sometimes faithful in a similar way to, remember, Arsene Wenger used to be really faithful to his sides, and we'd always kind of get frustrated that maybe he wasn't going to put a sub on because he was so keen to, and had that confidence that the team he'd selected could do the job. And there's definitely been so much benefit that's come from that faith that we've kept in players before, and Arteta's already seeing that this season as well, because we've seen players turn up late in games, big players turn up at big moments despite maybe not performing at their optimum for the previous 70, 80 or even 90 minutes in that fixture, because they could be so, you can have such game changers in different positions. But Kevin, in terms of what I describe as the blueprint for opposition teams, obviously you've played for a variety of different sides at different stages in terms of their competitiveness in the league. And do you feel as though teams will look at Everton and what they did and what Sean Dyche did, and will use that as a blueprint to go forwards, to the point where they might even change the way in which they play on the regular compared to when they're going to come up against Arsenal? And is that a concern for you?
I hope they do, Tom. I hope they do change the way they play and expect to get the same result. 100%. Because we've proven this season that it doesn't matter what style you come with. We've only been beaten twice this season. And the Everton game, we just weren't at the same level. You mentioned about bringing on like for like. Bringing on a different player in the same position isn't like for like, because Trossard isn't the runner, for instance. Trossard isn't the runner, so he's going to try and do things a little bit different. He's going to get on the ball and he's going to try and probe and work his way into the box, which is kind of different to how Martinelli does his things. Jorginho in midfield, we weren't playing between the lines quick enough, and obviously had to take Partey off. So you got to bring Jorginho on to try and get us going. But no matter what you try, it weren't happening. And I think Tommy Arseblog came on, one, to shore up that right-hand side, but two, to pick up in the box with set pieces, because we were outmanned. Odegaard picking up Tarkowski is a mismatch. It's a total mismatch. So we had to try and do things to try and, one, stop the thing at the back, but to two, try and do things a little bit different going forward. I'm not worried at all, Tom, if I'm honest with you. These games will happen during the season. They will. And if you can get away with a point, great. If you lose, but what happened at Spurs against Manchester City, and it does you a favor, you miss a bullet that week. But what you got to do, get on the training ground, and you got to get working at it, because you know what certain teams are going to do. Let's be honest. The Newcastle game, we should have been gone within the first 20 minutes. The game should have been over. But if you don't take your chances, teams could peg you back. We didn't really have many chances. We had one off the line, and Eddie put one wide. But apart from that, we just weren't good enough going forward, Tom. So I'm not worried about it at all. I think this Arsenal side right now have proven that they can bounce back. They can dust themselves down. And our Emirates form is going to be the key. let's be honest, you said, what is it, 6 games out of 9?
Yep.
If we've got 6 games out of 9, we've definitely got to win all those games at the Emirates, because that's your bread and butter. Away from home, anything could happen because you can be up against the pump. But I think Arsenal, this Arsenal team, get the job done against Brentford. And don't forget, week after week, Jesus is getting closer. So that's going to add something totally different than what we've got right now. Because you know what? I just want to make this point. I think Martinelli suffers a little bit when Jesus ain't there.
Mm-hmm.
Because Jesus has that ability.
I'd argue.
Yeah, he has that ability to be able to hold the ball, turn his defender. So Martinelli all of a sudden is 1v1 with his fullback with an attacker on the ball, and he could then run in. Jesus could move out. So we got more rotation. But hey, we're not complaining about Eddie because Eddie's done all right.
Yeah, the reason why I know it's a lot is because I think from Elliot hammering home the point, Clive, about how many times there's a pass between Martinelli and Nketiah, during games.
Yeah.
And it's next to nothing,
Yes. Well, I've had lots of Eddie debates, and I've been a bit harsh on him, if I'm honest, but only because, and I stopped being harsh because look, we're all fans, but when you see the optimal Arsenal game, our front four have around 50 touches each. And I always look for that. In the last game, Eddie had 21 touches and Saka had like 80 something. And Martinelli had 30 something. And we're not getting that equilibrium of touches in our front four. And when you have one player getting all those touches, he can be kicked and keyed on and blocked off. And you become one-dimensional. So it's not a good sign. And so you need someone with experience to read the game, pick up the slack, and stop looking for the box, looking for the connections in midfield. And it's just football. Every game is different. Every game creates a different challenge. How quickly do you see that challenge and adjust your game accordingly? No, I can sit here in my little podcast room and say, oh, well, I know what you need to do. I'm a genius. But when you're in the game, you're blowing out your backside. You got James Karkowski growling at you, saying, if you come into my side, I'm going to break your legs. Okay, if you know what I'm talking about. This is what happens, right, in the game. And suddenly you're not thinking about dropping deep, connecting. You're thinking about, we're 1-0 down. I want to score for the team. And then you disconnect yourself. And that's the key. And that's experience. Jesus has got that experience to turn, to chase. Watching Jesus at Chelsea, never leave me that game. He absolutely destroyed them. He didn't score, but anyone who watched that game live, you saw what he did to their whole back line. He destroyed them. That player is invaluable. And people say he hasn't scored for this many games. I'm thinking, well, you're not watching. You're not watching. The impact that he has on the opposition allows other people like Martinelli and Saka to really flourish. And so we need to get our top boys back. But within this, let's have a debate now. Within this, we are creating a different dynamic with Eddie, who's going to play. Right? So, and does it change the dynamic of our eights? Because what happened that last game, I found Xhaka's positioning was far too deep. He wasn't running through, creating distractions that allowed Martinelli and Eddie to really move off of him. So, okay, look, they are 6'1", 100 team. We got to protect set pieces, so Xhaka will play. We know that never comes off. But as a football people, let's discuss when Vieira came on. His control was tip top. His ability to receive the ball is very, very good. And I think he offers a great running threat from that 8. He wants to run away. So Odegaard runs to the ball. He wants to run through. He wants to run through, prepared to underlap and overlap. And around the edge of the box, he is cold. And I think there's every now and again, just make that change. We got to develop that position. We got to develop it. Let's make that change every now and again. See if we can create a new face, because every one of us listening, watching, they absolutely can name our first 11 without 2 seconds. There'll be no debate. We can all pick that further. There'll be no debate. But so can every opposition analyst and every opposition coach. Creating new faces is very important, even within game, just to throw a level of doubt. And we were scouted, we were watched, we were scouted, and we were stopped. No drama, first time in ages. But I think we be prepared for the evolution of this team. It may not end the season as we think it's going to end. And that may be a requirement, because the closer we get to the finishing line, the more people are going to watch and want to stop us. So we need to be prepared for different faces at the start and end of games, and we should embrace that.
Absolutely. I think that what's most important when you look at this Arsenal team, with it being so young as well, is always going to be confidence and momentum. And you really ride those waves of wins. And the points you've raised there tactically, Clive, just looking at the response on Saturday against Brentford is going to be so key to seeing obviously how we react to a poor result. As you know, Kev pointed out earlier, we've done it this season. Man United, Southampton, PSV, Brighton, Newcastle. We won the next game in those scenarios, and it shows you that growth from previous season. You know, last season we were losing games, like 3 games in a row, 2 games in a row here and there, and it really stunted the progression of us. But this season we've managed to turn that around. To round off the show, I've got a 2-minute round, so you've got 2 minutes each to answer your respective questions, so we can keep to time. So mainly, Clive, that's for you. I'm going to start talking first with you, Andrew, specifically about Brentford on Saturday, in the knowledge that City is on the following Wednesday. How do you approach that game in order to both stay competitive but to keep players fresh for that City game? Do you go into it full strength in both, or do you make a couple of tweaks?
I think he might make a couple of tweaks, to be honest. I think we'll probably see Tomiyasu come in for Ben White. I wouldn't be surprised to see Trossard start on the left. It wouldn't surprise me if Kieran Tierney started. It also wouldn't surprise me if Jorginho started. And I do think it's important, because having a good first 11 is fantastic, but as we saw last season, a good first 11 can't get you where you need to go. You need to have a deeper squad. You need to have trust in those players and faith in those players, and those players need to play. They need to feel involved. They need to feel important. They need to feel like they can contribute. So I wouldn't be at all surprised to see a few changes for the game against Brentford on Saturday, and I don't think I'd have any real issue with those changes, particularly if, for example, Jorginho was starting because Partey was, you know, a little bit less than 100%, and they want to make sure he's ready for City.
Lovely stuff. Kev, as a former striker, I'm going to ask you the striker question. How do you solve a problem like following Balogun? What do you do with him in the summer?
Well, you get him back into the building. You have a look at him, because you know what? We could have, you imagine, we could have done with him on the bench on Saturday, couldn't we? You know, somebody different, somebody who likes to run in behind. So he's a problem. He's a good problem to have, Tom. And that's what we want. Following Balogun's been outstanding. But we get him back in the building and we get him playing and we see what he's like in the group. I think that's important. If he does the business, then he's a key member of the squad, because realistically, we've got to be getting stronger and going for every tournament next season. So fair play to him for his form, but it's a problem that's easily solved because he's got a long-term contract.
Lovely stuff. Yeah, it seems such an obvious answer when you put it that way. Lovely stuff. And lastly, Clive, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Arteta, because I wasn't happy with his answer, so I thought you might be able to give me a better one. And that's with Sambi Lokonga going on loan. Obviously, in the sign of giving him, he needs minutes. He wants minutes. He's such a crucial age in his career that he needs to be playing to get the development that he needs. Are you worried that we've signed players like Kivior and Fabio Vieira, for instance, who are going to be extensively behind established players and aren't going to be getting the minutes that they need at such a crucial age to develop themselves?
How long have I got?
You've got 3 minutes max.
Well, the most important thing is that players play. So Kev said there about Balogun coming back, and we're all thinking we could have done with him on the weekend. We could do with this version of Balogun. When he was trundling around at Middlesbrough, no one was saying, come back. Do you see what I mean? And so he's developed by playing. And Sambi's gone out now to play. He may be a different player in 3 months' time, or at least we can make a decision upon him. Kivior now, one of those players I knew nothing about until I started watching him. And I watched the World Cup games that he played in, wasn't looking at him. I was looking at, and then you see those games, you think, okay, he looks pretty good, doesn't he? He looks really good. At the moment, there isn't a vehicle for him to play. But when the competition starts in March, Europa League, and the games become a bit more compressed, I think we're going to see him then. He needs to settle in, make sure he can understand the language, all the calls, all different drills. And so we want to see him, but not yet. But maybe in time, he's something to look out for. When he has played in midfield, but he's also played at the centre of a back three. How do we end games with Rob Holding in the centre of a back three? You could see that situation change once he's settled and he becomes a closeout guy in the centre of a back three. Quicker, stronger in the air, better distribution. So you can see how the evolution of the squad will change there. So as a number 8 discussion, we let Sambi go, and there's a bit of a hole there in depth wise. Xhaka's there. Who else plays 8? Now you're talking about Trossard or Vieira or Smith Rowe. So by making that change, you force someone else to step up.
Or
Zinchenko. Or Zinchenko, exactly. Because I love Tomiyasu at left back, by the way, inverted. I love that. And against, if you look about getting Vieira in, what you would do, you say, well, I can't play Vieira and Zinchenko, but I can play Tomiyasu left back, solid, and a 3-stone left 8. Do you see what I mean? I get my aerial ability at the back. I don't lose my size, but I get my back 5 base. I get my front 5 killers. So there are things we can do within the players that we have to create a different look. So I like what we did in January, particularly to create that hole in the 8. And I'd be so interested if he trusts people. Trossard's another one, by the way, who is going to be Santi Cazorla regen when he gets himself in, because you watch the videos of him and that's all he does. It's just two-footedness in the interior. He ain't going to be out on the left for much too long. As you get older, no chance. So watch his development. So interesting, Tom. I think he's left scope for evolution. I hope that answers it. Did I answer it right?
Yeah. No, I'm happy.
I never listen to the question anyway. I just start talking.
I'll tell you, just like they'll get the minutes as you would expect from him. But there you go. And with that, and right on the dot, it brings us to a close. Tom Sabo in the chat box, thank you so much for the kind donation. 4 of my favourites in one place. Very kind of you to say. I don't know who the
5 each. Look at that.
So yeah, I'll send them round. Checks in the post. Andrew, always an absolute pleasure to speak with you. Tell people where they can find you and what you're going to be up to.
Cheers, Tom. All the usual stuff on Arseblog. Just that's it.
Indeed. No, go check out all the latest stuff on Arseblog with the Arsecast out to yesterday. With James, and caught up with it today, but it was out yesterday. And of course the Patreon as well, with lots of extra content over there as well. Make sure you go and check it out. Kev, always a pleasure to see you on my screen, and you'll be checking out people on the Hybrid Squad as well. Make sure you tell people where they can find you, my friend.
At Hybrid Squad with Sophie, and at #1 Kevin Campbell on Twitter and Insta. So check me out.
Lovely stuff. And lastly, always a pleasure, Clive, for tuning in and keeping it short as much as he could. It was a struggle at times, but he managed it.
It was a struggle. I could see the eyes burning at me, so I thought, Andrew gives me that look. Gives me that look. So so obviously I'm on the Arsenal Vision, and that's all I do really. And maybe pop onto Andrew's every now and again, and pop onto yours every now and again, and pop onto Kev's every now and again. That's probably about it, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and over to the FCAs as well, as we just look around the room and go, this just isn't for us.
Nah,
it was great.
Not doing that again.
It was good fun. Thank you guys for listening. Most of all, thank you for making this what it is. Drop a like on the video if you've enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. I'll be back with you live bright and early, of course, tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. And have a fantastic evening. We'll see you very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.